So for this recital, I'm going to read a few poems. I would like to thank Tanner Nolan, who asked me if I had any specific episodes of the Esoteric Nerd podcast in which I shared any personal, metaphysical, or paranormal experiences. I thought about it and realized generally no. I mostly talk about GD and other teachings and how they can be applied and interpreted and used, as well as some of the problems that come up in groups and hierarchies and my personal experiences with them and a lot of personal anecdotes and stories. But I tend to avoid talking about those experiences. For one, it's generally something that happened more when I was younger. As far as whatever you want to call it, the non-physical realm, it's something that I've been more actively involved with rather than passively, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't qualify the fact that when I go to sleep at night, I tend to go into one of several temples that either I've visited or built, and spend time inside, accompanied by various beings that I usually don't interact with. If for no other reason than it helps me fall asleep, and it helps me lay there at peace with being awake for an hour and a half if that's what's going to be happening. What I tend to do when I lay down to go to sleep at night is think about ideas I have for writing projects or continue editing something I'm working on or that kind of thing, and that'll keep me awake for hours. So if for no other reason than to avoid that experience, I tend to do that, but I wouldn't call it a metaphysical experience or something like a wow. But if it were to happen without me directing and guiding it, then sure, I mean, that's the sort of thing that would qualify as, yeah, I laid down to go to sleep and I was brought into this temple and there were these beings there and it was so vivid, I could see the bricks. And it's like, well, I do that, but it's not something, it's not a surprise. You know what I mean? So I don't really consider that as like a profound metaphysical or anything that needs sharing. But that said, when I thought about it, there were a few experiences that I hadn't really, maybe I talked about once or twice on Esoteric Nerd briefly, but I did write poetry about it. One of them, was aided by psychedelics, which you can listen to here. It's called Joshua Tree. But there's a few others that were not, that were stone cold sober experiences. And so I thought I'd read a few poems today, inspired by the question. So thank you, Tanner. First, from Taco. These are probably out of order. This one was written on July 21st, 2013. Jagged rocks in my mind to look into later. When I was 10, I think, a younger doppelganger of my mom pulled up beside my dad and I on the 210 westbound, screaming rage and flipping off, looking right into my eyes sharply. Tyler, the dog, from the floor by my feet, yelped in fright and ran to the back of the trooper. Dad looked to the right. He saw, looked forward. Looking up toward the third eye, held his right hand up like Rinpoche holding his dorja, and she pulled back. Then came again, very quickly. Our car was faster. Later, in the kitchen at 81 Vista Circle, I said, I have these jagged rocks in my mind, some residue left behind. I asked what he had done with his hands. He said, it was a warding gesture. She would have been blinded by an infinite white light. It was like a mirror, blinding her with the brightness of her own mind, which I guess made her mad. I asked why she was so mad at us. Maybe it was the support your local sheriff bumper sticker. Or maybe, just like she looked exactly like your mother, we might have looked just like someone in her life she hates. Now I wonder, as I read about wrathful deities tamed by Padmasambhava, made to serve the Dharma, and Beul of jagged rocks tied into wrathful deities. Just reran the memory today is all, with new data. Trip. Next, Wiener Dog, 77, 49, 14, 12:04. She knocks, but still, I don't believe. This is from March 17th, 2022. Only questions. Why is it that Priyal and I both dreamt of a ghostly woman? Why did she delight in tormenting her, but only sit in the room where I went to be alone? Almost gray, Victorian dress, staring into space as I shook her by the shoulders, shouting, "What are you doing here? How did you get here?" I woke her from her nightmare, and she woke me from mine. In the morning, we discussed it. Is it some hungry ghost from the British period who gravitated toward our empty flat in Delhi while we were gone? Or is it something we brought back with us that followed us, one of the parishioners of that old empty Anglican, or more likely the empty Methodist church, in the town where the vicious Gurkhas fought the British and the Indians under them, reluctant at best to serve under the red-coated lords? Was it the wife or sister of one of the occupying soldiers of that, or some employee of the East India Company? Was she traumatized, widowed, raped, all of the above? Did she see horrors which were never written down, never photographed, and try to pray, try to sing hymns in that old Methodist church, and die later with a heart that couldn't move on? Or did she die in the midst of some trauma, some battle, some crazed Brit or Indian or Nepali, or all of the above? Did she terrorize Priyal, but only haunt me because we remind her of her husband and his lover? Or is she just a racist ghost, delighting in provoking fear in one of the native women? I have no answers, only questions. Here's the old Methodist church. So these next two come from my next poetry anthology, which will likely come out in 2 years, 3 years, I'm not sure. It depends. It's called Hamster Sauce. May 1st, 2022. In a dream, my mom was on the phone, Some Amazon voice chat. You sure it won't end up on your phone bill? Silly boomer. Complaining about working with the 8 at, I presume, Burbank? Relieved when I said she could just leave. By the end, overjoyed. Asked to hear me play the piano. I'll play the one I wrote for you. Play the other one. I think she knew if I sang the one for her, I'd remember and break the illusion that she was back in LA, where I was here in the sea. Break the casualness of this first conversation in a long time. She talked to Piyu too, and they were laughing a lot. I woke up right afterward. I think so I'd remember it. For this next one, just to preface a part of a poem. This poem is called My Plan, and it's from February 27th, 2022 in Burrito. But I'm only going to read part of it that's in parentheses. Mom was into Jung, Carl Jung. Introduced me to Man and His Symbols, then Joseph Campbell. My maternal grandpa, once, back when Jung was new, going strong, did dream therapy. A woman gave him a minic in a dream. His therapist asked, "How do you spell that?" He replied, M-I-N-I-K, like a small animal. He asked, "How do you know it was spelled that way?" Or, "Why was it spelled that way?" Ed, my grandpa, said, "My intuition, not intellect, knows." And it led him to developing the roll film adapter and later the trades. All right. That's the lead-in preface for a poem, another poem from Hamster Sauce, which I wrote today because I hadn't written it yet. So I wrote it today. Today being August 26th, 2022. The poem is called Monday the 17th. My grandpa's watch stopped in 1988, so to speak. Actually, the watch itself may have stopped before or after. The Ouija board once told Chris and I that on the scale from 1 to 10, 1 being basically first-time human, recently a dog, to 10 being enlightened, Grandpa was a 15. We had some amazing conversations through that Ouija board. He once introduced us to Tennessee Williams when I was directing Glass Menagerie. 67 after the moon she hit me was hard to decipher until I opened the script to page 67. Ride your broomstick to the moon. I won't forgive you until you apologize. Tom exits. Do you mean after you said that to your mom, she hit you? Yes. And we should have Amanda hit? Yes. Chills. Anyway, about 21 years after those days, I was unpacking the boxes I'd sent from California to India and telling Priyal about my grandpa. The stories poured out of me, his stories, my memories, those post-mortem long conversations, how he helped me again and again and again. And I said, I feel like he's here. This was his watch. It had stopped at 4:26 and 15 seconds, long ago, on some Monday, the 17th. As I stood there, telling Priyal these stories, it was none other than Monday, the 17th of December, 2018. A 1 in 210 chance that the day on the watch would match today. Not so difficult for a 15 to manipulate an encoded hello like that in 4 or 5 dimensions. It was good to hear from him again.